Okay, so you're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. For the rest of the show, we will talk about something different. How society affects literature and how in turn that impacts the rest of us. My question for you, what has fiction taught you about real life? Is there a book that really left its mark on how you look at the world around you? The text line is open, 709-327-8206. Emails, thesignal@cbc.ca. Joining me now in studio, we have Susie Taylor, author of Vigil, a brand new book that is tearing up the charts. Joel Thomas Hines, author of the acclaimed Down to the Dirt, which turns 20 this year. Willow Keane is here, author of the fantastic Eyes in Front When Running. And we also have George Murray, marketing manager, Breakwater Books. George is also a poet and the former poet laureate of St. John's. Guys, welcome to the studio. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
There's a thing tonight, George. You want to tell us about the thing first?
Yeah, I'm really here as a wrangler of authors. I've got Joel and Susie reading, or actually talking, at The Rooms. So it's an interview series that we do once a month in partnership with The Rooms, called Meet the Author. Starts at 7 p.m. at The Rooms. It'll just be the three of us sitting on stage talking fiction, talking books, and those kinds of things. So all are welcome. The tickets are free, but you have to either pre-register in advance through the Room's website, or you can get them right at the front desk when you come in, 7 p.m.
Free. That's my favorite word.
That is my number one price point.
It's pretty good, right? Free. Excellent. All right. I've got the book here in front of me, Vigilstor, Susie Taylor. Congrats on this.
Thank you, Adam.
Tell us about it.
Oh, where to begin?
It's really good. Like, I am reading through it. It's fantastic.
It's a collection of short stories, and I started to write the collection before the pandemic. I've probably been working on them for about 10 years. And it's changed a lot over the course of that time, and it's really strongly influenced by my life living in Harbour Grace and the sort of changes, the increase in violence, the increase in addiction that I've seen over the past decade there.
Yeah. So what you're noticing in real life gets kind of brought into you as a writer,
sure.
and author.
And I think you're interested. Sometimes you don't have the choice in the book that you write. It just shows up, and then you have to write it.
Mm-hmm. And Joel, your book, 20 years old. Remind folks about it if you could.
Yes, Down to the Dirt turns 20. I have a question for Susie.
Sure.
Why did you call it a collection of short stories and opt not to call it a novel? Because I just read through it, and I read it carefully, and it's all interconnected. You go back to the same characters all the time, and even you have to know who this character is for him to walk in and impact a scene, and you've been introduced to him over here. So what was that decision all about?
Well, I guess it's interesting because when I was reading Down to the Dirt, I was like, this is a collection of short stories. Why are you calling this a novel?
It's on.
Here we go.
I think, I wrote them as short stories, and I was selling them as short stories.
I did the same.
And then I tried to sell it a novel, and I couldn't. And so then I sold it as short stories.
Okay.
I mean, that's kind of partly the truth, yeah.
I think at one point my book was a collection. I didn't know I was writing a book, obviously. And then suddenly I had a manuscript. And then I go, if Trainspotting is a novel, I can call my book a novel. And then I was up against it with somebody, no, it's not a novel, it's a collection. But it has a linear
arc.
Yeah, and it's spread out over a period of about 10 years, the book, but still.
This sounds terrible.
What makes a novel?
But, I also kind of don't care. I'm I'm interested in characters. And, I believe that they're all work as short stories. But I think you write what you write. And I think, this particular book, it doesn't have an overarching narrator. It skips between first and third. It does all those things, many things that you also do in your writing. And I wasn't so fixated on, what is this? Is just get, these characters on the page.
During the writing?
Yeah.
Then afterwards you label it stories, though. So you made the decision.
I did make that decision.
Okay.
And I believe they stand up. I believe
they
each
do,
one
absolutely.
has the arc.
Yeah, no, it is there. So how did Down to the Dirt influence you for just like your thoughts around writing for here and place and with some themes from there to your own?
Okay, I'm just going to be straight up. I read this for the first time this week. It had been in my house. There's a story that is a very violent story about a cat.
Yeah.
And I got that far.
That came
and
up
I
at the
was
story
like-
meeting, actually. Everyone was like, oh, the cat. I was like,
I can't do the rest of this.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you, I read both of Joel's books this week, and I was kind of glad that I hadn't read them
What's the other
till
one?
afterwards. I'll be
The
burnt in our
latest one,
beds.
okay.
And
There's
I
a
was-
hot tub scene.
There's,
in that.
oh my God!
The
yes,
hot
I
tub
just
scene
posted about
trumps
that on.
the cat scene.
There's another scene in this that I'm not even going to mention, but
What is it?
something is found that belongs to a parent in the boiler room.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was like I'm like going to need therapy after all this. But
I really wish people could see Joel's smile right now. He's
I can't
enjoying
remember.
this.
I can't remember what I set down 20 years ago. I'm not responsible for that.
But I was
so.
like, there are things that Joel writes about differently, and I'm like, I'm not sure if Visceral quite covers it, but definitely there's like some. There's a level of viscosity that I will never probably reach.
There was a quote in Kirkus. They said it's like violent, heavy metal set in prose.
Right.
When they were talking something like that.
I
About
probably
the book.
liked that review.
Yeah.
Some horrible reviews, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reviews, but what are you going to do? You know, people are going to think. We'll bring you into this conversation. Here's a question, folks. So if we're talking about, I guess, well, at this point, writing influences, right? That first question I was asking for fiction. What's something or what work or story or book, what impacted you about like thinking of real life from fiction?
I'm kind of all over the map.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, there's no debate whether my book is a collection of short stories or a novel. It's a novel.
Yeah.
At least that's kind of how it started. Actually, it started as me going, oh, yeah, I'm going to write a screenplay. And then I had no idea what I was doing. So I decided to carry on in prose. But my influences are kind of all over the map. Like the book is about a couple who kind of meet a bit later in life. And when that happens in real life, you have to, if you want a baby, it's kind of something that needs to be talked about immediately. So it's about a couple who decide to pull the goalie and go for it. One of them wants it more than the other, and it ultimately destroys their relationship. But it's funny in a dark, humored kind of way. So yeah, my influences are kind of all over the place. I mean, Joel is obviously like,
Babies are the worst.
they're the worst and the best. I mean, well, these two writers here were obviously, a huge influence on my work, but like, I don't know. I guess like I'm a big fan of writers like David Sedaris and Lisa Moore. Like, and I'm not comparing my work to those writers at all, but those are the kind of influences I've drawn, like the really dark sense of humor, but also the just like the simple, beautiful prose that we all kind of aspire to when you're reading something like Michael Crummy or Lisa Moore. So yeah, I'm a bit all over the map, really. Yeah.
Yeah, like when I think of someone like Lisa Moore and you look at like February, for me it was like thinking of that event, right, with the Ocean Ranger, and then connecting through the fiction of it, right, and for the way Lisa wrote it. So that was something that kind of impacted me for just reading about something that I grew up with, right? So I'm born in 1980. This is something that's always kind of talked about as I was a kid, but then the entry point for fiction really helped to kind of think of the real folks involved. So it's kind of, I just find that kind of half interesting,
Yeah, and for me, it wasn't, like it's not a true story, but there are, like autobiographical elements in the story because I met my partner late and we had to decide what we wanted to do, and it really came from that. That place of love that a lot of people and older people, particularly in Newfoundland, like, so when are you having a youngster? And what do you mean you're not having a youngster? Or how come you're only having one youngster? Or now what's wrong with you? So like it's something that we all have to go through. And it always comes from a place of love, but it can be really a weird and hurtful thing to discuss for a variety of reasons that, the Christmas dinner table, for example. So that's always kind of intrigued me.
So why is it important to write the grittier side of stuff, the stuff that's not in the tourism ads? What does it do for folks who then kind of take that in and take that in their own minds and think about it?
Well, I think we're all fiction writers that write about reality. We're not interested in writing utopian novels. We're interested in getting to like what human experience is. And I think there are lots of Newfoundland writers that have done that. Lisa Moore, Carmelita McGraw, Bridget Canning, Some People's Children is an excellent example of that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think Newfoundlanders have a long history of writing like really strong novels about the reality of their experience.
Yeah.
It's easy to sell the province based on certain tropes.
You ever think of the clothesline?
Yeah, the clothesline, the rubber boots, the fiddles, those kinds of things. But I also think that there is an element of people out there that come to Newfoundland specifically to see culture at a different level, at a more street-like level, see what it's like. I know when I travel, I don't like to travel for 2 weeks. I like to travel for 6 months if I can, really get to know a place, go grocery shopping in the little stores and, those kinds of things, find the dive bars. But with these books, as I come from away myself, these kinds of books are educations for me in a weird way as well, because it's easy in the rest of Canada to walk into Galore by Michael Crummey, a fantastic book about Newfoundland, very magical and so forth, and then get a skewed perception of what it is to exist here. So these books act for me as a gateway into certain things. Like there's some stuff that goes on in Joel's book that I would never have gotten up to, but it's good to know it was there. And the same thing with Susie's book. Susie's books left me with shivers at the end, that last chapter. Fantastic. It starts out and ends with that incredible bang. And you can't get that. There's no nonfiction telling us that. Yeah. It's fiction that's telling us the truth in a weird way. It's like the book that we did with Chief Misael Joe, and Sheila O'Neill. They did My Indian and Sulaway, which are based on the oral histories and truths of the Mi'kmaq people, different from the written histories of the colonialists. And
Shocker.
so in a way, of course, shocker, and in a way they are correcting the historical record and telling the truth through fiction. So
you do get that really great connection to, it is such a cultural connection through literature for these types of stories, right? Like, so there's the culture of, sure, tourism commercials, all this stuff, written music, everything else, great. But then there's this different type of a connection that you get. So for writing it, as a fiction author, what's the learning process like for what you get from when you write? Like, do you understand more about yourself? Do you understand more about your home? Like, what do you get from it?
You asking me?
Yeah, sure.
Or the table in general?
Yeah.
I really don't know what I get out of it anymore.
Yeah.
I got to be honest with you, man. It's just torture for the most part.
Yeah.
I did a degree at King's in Halifax in creative nonfiction, and the one thing I took away from that is that fiction is where you go to tell the truth, which is something I had known going into it. But all the nonfiction essays and articles and bits and pieces that I had to write, there wasn't. The whole works of it was dramatized, so I just could not do it. And fiction is where I think a lot of people go to comfortably tell the truth, which is what I've been doing for years.
Yeah.
So what was the question again specifically?
Just, I guess we're going into what you, learning from what you learn about yourselves and your, whether it's from you or your culture or what's around you through the writing process, right? So when you're writing, whether it's Down in the Dirt or one of your other books, it's as you finish it, like, is there a learning process for you in this, for what you learn?
Everything I've ever written is just training ground for the next thing I'm planning to write. Yeah. And I go into it not knowing if I can do it, go through a lot of self-doubt and a lot of lows, a lot of highs. But generally, yes, I've learned something coming out of it, and most often I would never do it again the same. Yeah. Right? But for my first novel, I kind of was, I exhausted all my reading. Yeah. And I was looking for my voice on the page, and I couldn't find it. And I also had this strong desire to set the record straight on my own autobiographical story. Yeah. And that's kind of what I set out to do with Down to the Dirt. So now I own my own history, and I got the last say on it, and I put a little stamp on it. So that was an underlying motivation for sure.
You know, Susie, I wondered if I was going to ask Joel this, but he kind of just answered it. Did you ever did anything in the writing of this take you by complete surprise? Any truth come out that just actually knocked your socks off when you wrote it?
Yes. And I would say, like, writing is a weird thing. And I just agree with a lot of what Joel says. It's like a lot of it is just brutal. It always reminds me a lot of running. Like, it's like awful 90% of the time, but then there's like this 10% time when you don't know it's happening. And then, like, you look up an hour later and there's this thing on the page and you're like, I don't know where this came from. And I think sometimes where there you find out truths. And I think especially in times when we live with so much moral certainty that there is good, that there is bad, that there are people that would never do this or people would do this, I think writing has made me realize in different circumstances with a different set of personality traits, I could do anything. Yeah. I could do any terrible deed if the world had lined up against me badly.
That's a big realization because it takes sometimes people, you don't get there for that, right? Because it's, I agree with that. Will, what about you?
What have I learned?
Yeah.
I'm kind of like Joel. Like, sometimes when you're doing it, you're like, why? This is torture. What is even the point? But similar to Susie, like, I'll write something and be like, oh God, and running too, right? It's such a good analogy because, like, running is garbage, but then you do get that few minutes when you're like, you feel like you're in a Nike ad, and writing is very much like that. Like, I do a lot of my writing via like morning pages. I'll get up and be like, oh, you just write whatever that comes to your head and you think it's a load of crap, and then you go back a few weeks later, you're like, oh, I wrote that and that was actually not bad, So I guess I've learned that, like, I think most writers are a little better than they give themselves credit for, even on the bad days. Like, there's always something, there's always a kernel of good in there that you just, like, once you let loose and just let yourself, try not to self-edit immediately. That's what later on is for, right? And when you have the words in front of you, it's better to take them out than it is to try to find them, I guess.
You are listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. We're talking about how society impacts or affects literature and how that in turn impacts us. Here's my question for you. What has fiction taught you about real life? Is there a book that really left its mark on how you look at the world around you? If you want to join the conversation, text us 709-327-8206. Email us thesignal@cbc.ca. Here with me in studio, full house, Susie Taylor, author of Vigil, Joel Thomas Hines. I'll say 20 years now for Down to the Dirt, so we're talking about that book today. Willow Keane, author of Eyes of Front When Running. And we also have George Murray, poet, former poet laureate at St. John's and marketing manager for Breakwater Books. I was just thinking, like, the news cycle, and Susie, something like in our emails back and forth, right? You mentioned the news cycle, the increasingly terrible conditions at HMP, the huge fentanyl seizure in Steady Brook a few days ago. I write fiction, but my fiction is informed by an awareness of how things like this are happening across the province. I wonder if you could just kind of expand on your thoughts of just kind of taking in the news cycle and how that can inform writing and what you do.
Sure. I think that, like, as a writer, I very much write from observing the things that are around me, and you can have a sense of things are getting worse. But then when you read about things like that fentanyl seizure and Dr. Nash saying, like, no amount of fentanyl is safe, which is fine, but it doesn't resolve the fact that it's going to get in people's hands. It makes you realize how vulnerable we are. And writing this book was particularly strange for me because as I wrote things, many of those things actually were happening in the news, and people were texting me and saying, oh my God, Susie, did you hear this news report? And that's even part of the reason that I use a different name than Harbor Grace for my book, because I wanted it to be clear that I was writing things after the fact that they had happened.
Yeah, and because there's drug selling in your book, there's substance use disorder, there's everything you have in a community where those types of things are happening, from death to how people talk to how people react to everything else. And I find it fascinating because, you look in the news, this is the real world that we're living in. But do we think, how hard, you can be in a bubble as well in the world. So do you see that for where you live? Like, is there a bubble thing in Newfoundland or Labrador, Newfoundland and Labrador? Yeah.
I think it's easy to be in a bubble if you're in a higher economic class.
Yeah.
I've always lived in really mixed income neighborhoods. I've lived on all incomes, well, all relative incomes.
Yeah.
But I think if you are someone who has managed to stay outside of some of those things, then yeah, you can just turn your blind eye to those things that are happening.
Joel, what about you?
Quite often, man, I was just down in it.
Yeah,
right?
I know.
Was right in the middle of it all, and I was writing about what I was in the middle of. And, you know, when it comes to the whole fentanyl thing, I mean, I've done fentanyl. So
Yeah.
I know a bunch of sides of it, right? And because for all the ODs you're hearing about, you're not hearing about all the great trips people are having because it's out there somewhere, right? And it's happening.
Yeah, there's a reason why folks are doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
And but for most of my work, I haven't looked much further than my own backyard.
So has that changed at all now from 20 years ago?
I'm certainly making strides to change gears as a writer and experimenting with different styles, different voices. But I'm still very interested in peripheral characters who sort of dance around the edges of society. It's always been what's attracted me as a writer and as a reader. Outsiders and outcasts and the criminal element and soul searchers, ultimate soul searchers, they all are to me. So, yes, I have and continue to draw on my own personal experiences, but I've drastically moved away from my own story.
So you're thinking about it, you're crafting other people's stories now, but still the base comes from your lived experience of growing up.
And you want to... You want to grow, you want to flex, you want to see what you can do and what you're capable of. And I've taken on some projects over the past few years that are beyond me yet, that I thought I was ready for, and I just wasn't. And they're shelved for now, and I'm on to something a little bit more reasonable for me.
Yeah. Anything you can talk about? Like, are you writing now? Like,
I'm always writing.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of essays and short stories, and I sort of trying to reset. And I've been sending things out to periodicals again, and I got a thing coming out in the Globe and Mail next weekend or the weekend after about the rehab situation, the resource situation here in Newfoundland. So I'm getting into more outreach-based writing. And, working on a couple of big projects, too, that are, a bit daunting. But
why is outreach-based writing so important for you right now?
I'm involved in a lot of outreach.
Yeah.
So I do some outreach work down at HMP and the detox and other parts of the St. John's area. And because I'm... it's no big secret that I've been in recovery for many, many years. And so recovery from drugs and alcohol and addiction and other behaviors is a major part of my life and major part of my worldview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it takes a lot to talk about it like this, too, right? Like, so...
I mean, I thought about that coming in here. Am I going to talk about that if it comes up?
Yeah, I didn't want to push it on it either, right?
Whatever. It's been all around me, and I know people who've not made it through a night and are dead now. I know a lot of people who are dead, and I know a lot of people who are just out there and lost.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for where I am to be able to come in here today. I should be dead 10 times over.
Well, I appreciate you coming in and talking like this. We got a text come in. I'd like to ask your guests, what was the best course or learning tool or experience that was key to writing and completing their first books? I've had a dream of one day writing a book and can't seem to get steered in the right direction. Anyone with thoughts on that?
Reading.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I tell all my students that the first 75% of writing is reading. The more you read, the wider you read, the better your own writing is going to become.
And just to expand your wheelhouse too a little bit. Like a lot of people, I think, read the same books, but kind of a bit of everything.
And practice. Like it's a practice. It's something you have to do again and again and again and again and every day.
And be prepared for like massive rejection as well. You can't let it get you down. That's
that old Samuel Beckett line, right? Fail, then fail better.
Yeah.
Right? So that's literally what it is failing over and over again until you don't fail.
So when do you start realizing through this and all that failure that you're like, hey, this is coming along. This might be something. Because you do all that reading and then you're doing some of that writing after once you get into it. Like Joel, like you were saying earlier, trying to find your voice. And there's always going to be self-doubt. There's always going to be imposter syndrome, right? That's always there. But when are you like, or when were you like, actually, this short story might be something, or this might be something that can get published at some point?
I think it's like, for me, it was submitting the first short story.
Yeah.
And to just kind of put it out there and see what happens. I think for me, I was like, I had the story and whatever. Like, maybe I'll just submit it to like whatever's on the go. I think I submitted it to like the cover prize or something, and then made the long list and was like, can I do this?
And you're like, get out of town.
What?
Yeah.
And then from there was a couple of little things like that kind of, I guess, gave me encouragement, and from there, I kind of just went from there. But I think the big step is not being afraid to put your work out there and not being afraid of the criticism. I mean, I've been an actor for 25 years, so I'm like massively used to like rejection and criticism. So writing for me is like, I got rejected, whatever, who cares, right? But so I was getting used to that. I had a bit of tough skin.
You had a thick skin on it. Yeah.
I do, yeah. But I think a big part of it is just like letting the baby go. Well, just let it out there, put it out in the world, and see what happens. And when you get that first little glimmer, you're like, that kind of gives you the impetus to go, maybe I can write a novel.
Susie, what about you?
External validation is wonderful, and for me, like I pretty much wrote my first book in complete isolation from the rest of the writing world, and then I just lucked out and won the Fresh Fish Award. So it was kind of like boom, and that's great. But ultimately, you just have to when your writing is lazy. When you're looking at your writing, when it's not good, and so you really have to learn to trust your own instincts.
So what reading were you doing that helped you kind of get? I mean, for a lot of folks, I know it could be everything, right? Big range. But what are some things for you that was like, this was, influential to get me going? I
read a lot, and then after we moved to Harbour Grace, I read like the entire Newfoundland literature section of Harbour Grace, with the exception of Joel Thomas Hines that I was saving until this week.
Yeah.
They don't sell me in Harbour Grace.
We're not sure if you're ready for this, Susie. Yeah. Carmelita McGraw's short story collection was major.
What was that called?
It was, I can see the cover. It has the Andrea Cooper painting on it. Yeah.
I love that book, too.
And actually, Larry Matthews has a collection by the Burning Rock Collective, which was also, and I started to read that, and I thought, I think I should try and do this.
Yeah.
Lynn Cody's book Hellgoing was also another book that I really felt, this is like a narrator that is walking similar lines in life that I am.
Because reading Vigil, like it's everything about it. There's so much with it I identified with, just for the characters and the realness of it for the community. So it was just it was really striking.
Did you find your inner Stevie?
Maybe a little bit.
I remember reading Hold Fast for the first time, and I was a voracious reader as a kid, and I had read this and that, and The Hand of Robin Squires, all that era, Scott Odell books, and then a teacher handed me a copy of Hold Fast, and because I was troubled, and I read. My saving grace was that I was a reader. And I remember reading Hold Fast and hearing a kid speaking in my accent, talking about hunting rabbits and on the skidoo, and it was set in Newfoundland, and it was this amazing adventure. And I realized somewhere along there, we can tell our own stories. It's the first Newfoundland book I ever read. And I continue to read that book every year around Christmas.
How many times have you read it then?
Well, I'd say I've read Hold Fast 20-odd times.
Wow.
Yeah. And then House of Hate, same thing. You were talking earlier about a palatable version of Newfoundland being sold to the world.
Yeah.
House of Hay came out in 1971, man, and that's a tough story. And it's not about alcoholism. It's worse. It's about a guy who grows up in an alcoholic home with no booze in it, just hatred and violence, and it was such a groundbreaking book, and that launched Newfoundland literature into the can-lit scene back then. So he was in the company of Mordecai Ritzler and Timothy Finley and Margaret Atwood and all those
A few
crew,
names, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And Harold Horwood, Tomorrow Will Be Sunday, which is a incredible story of a preacher, a Baptist preacher down on the South Shore, I believe, who gets involved with a guy, the main character, right? So it's like there's been a history of, hey, we're going to tell you how it is, happening here for a long time. You look at Codco, you look at all the poets, you look at Des Walsh, Agnes Walsh, all those people. They've always been firmly planted on the ground saying, wait a second, Newfoundland is not that, it's also this.
Yeah.
Right.
It's that truth thing we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Right? The truth in fiction.
Yeah.
Because it's like, hey, you want to know what we're like? Well, here's all of our authors. Here's what they're writing about, and this is here too.
It's always been here, and it started to change when the big publishers started to come in and the agents started to come in and hoover up all the writers. It's what happened, right?
Yeah.
In 04, 05, it happened to me. I put out Down to the Dirt, and I was headhunted by an agent who then decided that Newfoundland wasn't the place for me, that I had to be national.
Yeah.
And then everything started to change on the whole scene. There was this Newfoundland literary scene that was so hot. And it was so hot it was sickening, in a sense, right? A lot of people did really good by it. But it changed what people wanted from the island.
So where are we now?
Where I was gonna say where I am.
Yeah.
Like it has not gotten easier for me. I have Governor General's Award and when I put that novel out, I fought tooth and nail to get that novel published from a publisher that I was already with, right? And they were like, no, we don't. So I had to. I was like totally on my own years later with 4 or 5 books under my belt, tried and tested. You know I'll deliver. You know I can do this. You know I got something to say. And I still had to fight for it every step of the way, right? So it does not get easier. And if it did, I don't think I'd be still here.
Right. Yeah.
Well, we're seeing people coming home now to Newfoundland publishers from major, multinational presses. Kevin Major, who you're talking about with Holdfast, is publishing his books with Breakwater again.
Yeah.
Agnes Walsh just published. She was with National Publisher. She's published with us again. And so you're starting to see that. People are like, the days of the mega advance and the...
And writers build the press.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, you look at Black Sparrow Press, Charles Bukowski was their sole writer.
Yeah.
He built his career and the publisher.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Well, or even Virginia Woolf, right?
Yeah.
And so, and again, this is what makes it, makes it a joy to be involved with this. This is my first time sitting on this side of the desk. Been a writer for 25, 30 years, but first time sitting as a publisher. I'm seeing the other side of it for the first time, and all the work that goes into it, and all the person hours and money and whatnot, but then I get to walk out.
Journalists.
Yeah, and I get emailing Adam regularly. I get to sit tonight on stage at the Rooms talking to 2 incredibly intelligent people that we've been talking here today, and I'm in contact with Willow all the time and all these other authors that I would only ever see out and about on the street, but I got a different level of conversation with them, and I'm getting to help, take their books to as far as I can take them, but you don't blame anyone for taking the big payday and going to a multinational, but then sometimes things turn around and they come back.
You're like, we're still here?
Yeah, we're still here, and we're willing to find the talent and incubate it and see what we can do with it. So,
do you enjoy what you're doing now?
I do enjoy what I'm doing. That's the scary thing about it. I didn't know that I would, but I'm actually really into it, and I'm getting involved deeper and deeper in the press. So being able to edit the poetry line and certain other things, so it's a lot of fun. But Joel's book was with Killick, which was this small imprint of creative. Breakwater later bought creative out, but Joel's book was already gone to HarperCollins by that point. They'd picked him up, so you got this small press that gave a chance to this voice that became a national voice. And Joel doesn't just, I use Joel when I'm advocating for the arts. I say a Joel Thomas Hines book starts out in Joel Thomas Hines' head, but eventually it becomes a novel that needs printers and distributors and so forth, and then it becomes a play, and then it becomes a movie, and every screw that sold for a movie came out of Joel Thomas Hines' work that he did alone in his room. And the same thing's going to happen when Susie's book sells for a movie, and the same thing's going to happen over and over again. So that's the way culture spreads, like ripples, right? He's the stone that hits the pond, and the culture spreads out the rest of the way. And Breakwater and any small press wants to be part of that, wants to be that part of the stone that hits the water.
Well, it's all an interesting spot to be at culturally right now for the province, to look at the range of authors, the range of topics, to look at what's being chosen, right? Whether it's some outreach writing that's about to happen, whether it's talking about a fictionalized version of Harbor Grace for the reality of what's going on with drugs and how that impacts folks, whether it's talking about families and giving birth late in life, the range is vast now, and it's really nice from my position. I just kind of like seeing it and like working with you and having folks come in for these types of discussions. We just had a text come in. Joel Thomas Hines is in a class of his own. No writer has as much honesty and courage as Joel.
It's my girlfriend. It must be my girlfriend wrote that in.
Yeah.
Your check is in the mail, sweetie.
That's pretty good. Very timely. I mean, it's nice to hear that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, that's great to hear that kind of stuff.
But
again, there's been some dark nights of the soul ever since.
Of course.
I can't let myself forget.
You wouldn't be any good if there weren't, Joel.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all part of the fabric.
One of the most satisfying, gratifying things about my first novel was that I attracted readers who didn't read, who had never read a book before, whose mother made them read the book, or their girlfriend said, "You got to read this book," or something like that. And they never read another book since. They didn't read one before, except some like Mario Lemieux bio when they were a teenager, right?
Yeah.
And that was, and like my books go around the prison down by the lake. They're passed around, and I remember somebody gave me a copy of that book, and it was just beat to bits, and the cover was torn, it was all wrinkled, it was soft, and I was so happy, and the pages were all stuck together. And,
Which pages?
I was
I was reading something this morning. Oh, okay, yeah.
I was so happy when somebody handed me that copy of that book, because it's like, so I've reached some people who don't read, and that's
huge.
The best part of that. Yeah, it's not about the sales or the reviews, or it's about like one person getting off on it, something
Connecting.
Right? Yeah.
Well, that's actual impact, right? That to get that down at when you're talking to folks at H&P. I mean, that's impact.
Yeah.
What if for both of you, for when you hear from folks who connect with what you've written?
It's I mean, Joel's right. It means the world, and because my book deals with everything from it's like miscarriage, abortion, infertility, like everything. I've been approached by a lot of people. Like I did and it also deals with like postpartum depression. And I had an older woman come up to me after I did my reading at the Sparks Literary Festival a few weeks ago, and she was maybe in her 60s, very clearly a woman who's lived a life and is a matriarch. And she looked at me, she shook my hand. It was a very good handshake, and she was like, your reading was really great. She said, you're talking about a lot of things that women don't talk about. Thank you for that. And that really kind of meant the world to me,
that's
especially
everything.
Coming from a woman who's older, who might have been through things, and I had read a little chunk of my book where the mother is going through this crazy postpartum depression, and she was very serious. So like when she came up to me, I was like, oh my God, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, you're like, here we
go. But she was like, good for you, thank you for that. And I just was like, that's probably the best compliment I've ever received. Yeah.
I had an old woman, some reading, who came up and slapped me. very gently and more than once and kept saying, bad, 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 bad. And I was like, oh, yeah, I did it, man. I made it.
See? Connection.
Yeah.
Any kind of connection, really,
I will say that, like, I'm, like, pretty under the radar at home. I think people think, like, I mimeograph things and, like, sell them at the farmer's market or something. But when the event came out with Joel, people were like, oh, my God, I love that guy. So that was kind of fun. People were like, oh, maybe Susie is, like, actually a writer, not just like telling everyone she's a writer. She posts her poems on Facebook or whatever they think.
Oh, I think you very clearly are.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I'm also the one that gets all that, watches out for your reviews and your different things and that. And everyone's already, Joan Sullivan's called this the book of the year in the Telegram. And
Nice. Joan, friend of the show.
She called it. She said, it's early yet, but I'm going to call it. This is going to be one of the books of the year. So, and it is a book that's doing that, and I'm hearing it here in town. So I'll whisper louder out towards Harbor Grace.
There we go. And remind folks for tonight, last word.
Yeah, absolutely. Tonight we've got Joel Thomas Hines celebrating 20 years of Down to the Dirt, and we've got Susie Taylor celebrating the publication of Vigil, two gritty Newfoundland books on stage at the Rooms in discussion, 7 p.m.
Susie Taylor, Joel Thomas Hines, Willow Keene, George Murray, thanks for this discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
All right, let me see. Coming up tomorrow on the show, from Pink Shirt Day to other anti-bullying campaigns and organizations, bullying awareness and prevention. Talked about a lot these days. But is it making a difference? That's our question. We got a full discussion lined up for you tomorrow, but get in touch with that. Taking us out, local artist Selena Boland has a new single that just dropped last week. Here she is with Same Day Over.
He moves slowly.